without that instruction, if you were a pilot and you didn't want to fly into a mountain, you would fly Victor 23.
Sorry, yeah. What is Victor 23?
Okay, Victor 23, which again is part of the Cooper legend.
Sure.
It's so much part of the Cooper legend that there is a bar in, I think it's Vancouver, Washington, called Victor 23. And it's full of Cooper paraphernalia. Victor 23 is a low-level airway defined by the Federal Aviation Administration, runs all the way from the Canadian border down to, I think, certainly to Sacramento, and I think somewhere further south. I forgot what's the last southernmost point. Victor 23 follows almost a southerly heading. It's the approximate heading is about 180. That's almost south, but it diverges to the order of 10 or 15 degrees east or west. In other words, it follows a kind of dogleg pattern, which is necessary to stay clear of terrain. In other words, flying south from Seattle, it's following mainly Interstate 5, which is on low ground. When it gets to the Oregon border and crosses the Columbia River, after that it follows the Willamette Valley, which again is lowland. It keeps you very well clear of the Cascades on your port wing, and it also keeps you clear of the coastal Cascades on your starboard wing. So the airway essentially is following terrain and assuring that you have very good ground clearance all the way down to California. This airway is, I think it goes up to 14,000 feet. So if you fly at 10,000 feet, you're well within the corridor. And also, I think a very important point is that Victor 23 was 8 nautical miles wide. That's to say, it has a center line, which is on the maps. And if you're told by air traffic control to fly Victor 23, you have the freedom to fly 4 nautical miles to left or right of the center line. And you're still conforming with instructions. If you go outside that corridor, you would be expected to tell air traffic control. So it's like a pipe, it's like a tube. Okay, and they're told be in that tube.
Okay, and so this is based on some of the suggestions you sent over, the additions to the questions I sent to you. This FBI map or the Air Force map you mentioned.
Yes.
What is this? Where does this come into play?
Okay, well, the FBI map is a very interesting document. Obviously, in real life, it was about something like 6 feet long and probably 18 inches wide. And it covered, it's based on an old FAA map. It covers the airspace from Seattle all the way to the Oregon-California border. And you can see airports on the map. You can see controlled airspace. They don't show the Victor 23 corridor, but you can obviously overlay that. You can see where it is. That map, I call it the FBI map. And the reason I call it that is because it appears and has appeared since 2008 on the FBI's website in very, very poor quality, very low resolution, such that you cannot even make out the names of towns on the map. It is that poor quality. The FBI have never claimed to be the author of that map. And I think the reason is that they are not. They were not. I think the map was produced by the US Air Force, which is why there are many FBI documents referring to what they call the Air Force map, in quotes. But since in the FBI vault, they don't actually reproduce the map, you can never be sure that when they refer to the Air Force map, they are referring to the same map which is elsewhere on their site. So you need to make some deductions. Okay, the Air Force map is the same map which is elsewhere on their site, and it's this map which goes from Seattle to California. Like I said, the map is very poor quality, but there do exist some higher resolution portions of it which were given to the Washington State Historical Society by means of a Freedom of Information request in 2013. So we have a few parts of the map which are at relatively good resolution, and I use those parts in my book by permission of the Washington State Historical Society. The other thing that's interesting about the map is that, well, like I said, although the Victor 23 corridor is not specifically marked on the map, there is a very crude hand-drawn line which runs down the middle of the map, which purports to be the track of Flight 305. It looks like it's been drawn with a felt pen and quite crudely, but it's good enough for our purposes. And when you superimpose the Victor 23 corridor on top of the map, you can see that that track, that hand-drawn track, is within the V23 corridor. There's been a lot of debate on internet forums to the effect that Flight 305 departed from the corridor at some points, but obviously, well, I say obviously, but the way I read those claims is that these claims are made in order to defend a preconceived narrative. In other words, they need to make the flight depart in order to get the flight to a place where they want it to be. But I spent a lot of time, I really spent a lot of time, and I wrote a whole chapter of the book looking at the flight path, and I could find no evidence whatsoever that Flight 305 had ever left the Victor 23 corridor. I know there's people that will disagree with me on that, but I looked at 8 or 10 sources of data, and for me, the map is good enough. I think for the purposes of making informed judgments about where the airplane went, I think the FBI map is good enough, and I'm not inclined to debate that it's not.
Okay, and so and quickly then the chase planes, the Air Force chase planes. What what did they accomplish?
Well, in essence, nothing. But I guess the story, if we could ever learn it in detail, would tell us something. But the short story is that two F-106s departed from McCord Air Force Base to trail Flight 305. And a little bit after that, a T-33 from the Oregon Air National Guard departed to Portland Air Base with the same mission. Both of those airplanes talked to Seattle Center, which is the same air traffic control center that was talking to Flight 305, but on a different frequency, obviously on a military frequency. There was a period where one air traffic controller, and he's a gentleman whom I've corresponded with in some depth, was handling both the Flight 305 and the chase planes at the same time for a period of about something like 20 minutes, which was difficult work for him because he had 2 different frequencies to monitor, and he had to get up and toggle switches. And of course, he had a very, very demanding task, which was to keep separation between the chase planes and the airliner. He wanted them to be close enough to the airliner to pick up radar signature, but not sufficiently close to be in a collision situation. And we have to bear in mind that this was dark by this time. Visibility was poor. They were above cloud, and they probably had very little ground reference. But the short story is neither the F-106s nor the T-33 ever made visual contact with Flight 305. Therefore, they never saw the hijacker jump and could not say anything about when and where he jumped. They probably did get radar signatures, probably intermittently, and probably those radar signatures eventually were fed back to McCord and became part of the Air Force map. But I cannot say that I know that for sure, but it's to me, it's the only way that they could have produced the Air Force map, because by the time the airplane was down around Portland, they would have been out of line of sight with Seattle and with McCord. So McCord ground radar, the SAGE radar, would not be able to pick them up. They would have to rely on the chase planes to pick up the airliner and then retransmit that signature back to McCord, where it would later be synthesized with the ground radar.
Right.
And I believe the F-106s stayed with Flight 305 all the way to the Oregon-California border, because otherwise you wouldn't have that track. There's nobody else could have picked up that track, so it must have been the F-106s. We know that the T-33 turned around somewhere in the region of Eugene, Oregon. So they didn't stay very long in the chase, and we have no way of knowing if they picked up a radar signature or not. That's the short story. For what it's worth, I believe I have the names of those of the pilots, and I did try to get in touch with them, but did not succeed. The two F-106 pilots are now deceased. The T-33 pilot might still be alive, but I was not able to locate him. I couldn't reach him.
Okay. So you touched on. We'll get to the jump, of course. Briefly, though, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the weather conditions.
Okay, the weather conditions were well. Firstly, and I think this is a very important part of the story. The weather conditions known to the FBI were all at ground level to a maximum of 7,000 feet. And basically, those weather conditions were recorded only at Portland and at Salem, Oregon, which is best part of 100 miles away. So they did not have weather between Seattle and Portland, which is the central hypothesis was that the hijacker jumped during that segment of the flight. They extrapolated the data that they had. Sorry, I think I just said Portland and Seattle and Salem. I think actually it was Seattle and Salem.
Okay.
Anyway, Seattle and Salem are something like 150 miles apart. So to interpolate, between those two introduces a lot of uncertainty. My approach was to use a database which has been available for more than 100 years from radiosondes or weather balloons. This database has been maintained by the National Oceanic and NOAA. Right now, my mind is blank as to what that stands for. Something like National Oceanic, and you can look it up.
Yeah.
Anyway, these are the guys who launched weather balloons, and they did this very systematically on almost a daily basis from certain radio balloon launching sites throughout the USA. And in their database, I found 3 or 4 sites